Conservatives and big business have craved it for years, and now it seems within reach. Is a levy most of us haven't been paying just a click or two away? An Arkansas version of a bathroom bill and the implied threat of a veto. And another hot button, heat and higher ed. Arkansas Week next.
Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.
Hello again, everyone. Thanks for joining us for Arkansas Week. High stakes and some tense moments in the Arkansas General Assembly this past week. Benji Hardy joins us from Arkansas Times, where he is a reporter. Wesley Brown, reporter, columnist for Talk Business and Politics. Steve Bronner, an independent journalist. And we'll begin with perhaps what is, fiscally speaking, the highest stake, the highest priority anyway, of the conservative political movement for longer than a decade. Benji, that's tort reform.
Yes, Senate Joint Resolution 8 is the vehicle to do that this session. And in a lot of ways, it's a revival of Issue 4, which was thrown off the ballot, which is going to be placed before voters in the election in November. That was not a legislatively referred issue. It was initiated by petition, but the state Supreme Court threw it off at the last minute. Voters did not get a chance to weigh in on that. Now the legislature is trying to put it on the ballot in November 2018. And it looks like that will most likely happen. The legislature can refer up to 3 constitutional amendments. This looks to be the one that the Senate is going to choose, considering the number of sponsors on the bill. And I mean, it's what everybody has expected will be, of the 3, it's the one that we do think is definitely going places.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of strong people behind it, the Arkansas, the State Chamber of Commerce, the nursing home industry. So you've got a lot of money behind this. Still, even once it gets done, there's still a lot of work to do. I think because it's a voter-initiated referendum, so it's going to have to be you're going to have a battle out there for both sides, which is trial lawyers, both bar association, trying to different talking points to voters. So and that comes to voters in November 2018. So that's a little while for this to kind of get into the public's eye and see what's coming.
It'll be an expensive campaign, Steve.
Mm-hmm. It will, and it's not necessarily a slam dunk even among conservatives. Yesterday was pretty dramatic, the vote in the Senate. When they went through the first round of voting, it was like 13-10 or something. A lot of senators, including a lot of Republicans, did not vote when their name was called because they were waiting to see how everybody else voted. There are some even conservatives who have some issues with the caps are low, about $250,000 for non-economic, and about 3 times compensatory damages for punitive damages. There's also some issues with the idea that the legislature would have some ability to set rules for the Supreme Court.
We'll get to that in a second.
Yeah, separation of powers.
Yeah, separation of powers. Yeah. And then there's the idea that lawyers' fees would be capped at 33.33%. Even some conservatives say, the state has no business telling people how much they should pay somebody they want to pay in a private contract. Now, supporters say it's not the same as other kinds of private business transactions. The lawyer is in a state of power. The victim is a victim at that moment, so they're not in the same state. But it really is it's not quite a slam dunk. It's going to be an interesting fight, not just between trial lawyers and business, but even among people of different types of ideologies.
Yeah. One of the things that came out of it was Senator Missy Irvins, who's the sponsor. She was touting it as an economic development bill, saying that, and that's, I think, from the business lobby, that's what you're going to see out there once the campaign starts, to to hit the people is that we're losing jobs, we're losing business because all these companies are scared to come to Arkansas because of lawsuits and things like that. So I think that's going to be the real issue that the public gets to hear from both sides. That's going to be a big argument.
So, of course, from the other side, the public's going to hear lots of heartbreaking stories about people who have been injured in a medical malpractice situation and say have lost a limb, have lost their life even, and they're going to be capped at $250,000 for damages relating to pain and suffering, non-economic damages. And I mean, as far as the attorney fees, that from the perspective of plaintiffs' attorneys, that's really where this measure hits hard, because if you limit those contingency fees to 33 1/3%, you also cap damages at $250,000, then you're really limiting the incentive for attorneys to take on these cases, especially if you're talking about people who don't have the money up front to pay for a lawsuit and are reliant upon the contingency fee in order to gain any traction in litigation.
I think it's fair to say the clinical community has craved this kind of legislation for decades, complaining that it has, and perhaps it does have a profound impact on malpractice insurance premiums. The flip side of that, as Benji mentioned, is malpractice cases tend to be long, protracted, and very expensive to prosecute.
Right. This is going to be, it's going to be about and supported by big donors, big law, big business, big associations that represent a lot of small businesses, but they're big when they're out at the
multi-state.
But for voters, it in many ways comes down to small. The child who lost his daddy because of an act of negligence versus the small town doctor who's struggling to stay in business because she has to pay really high malpractice medical premiums and she's scared of one lawsuit ruining her and she's thinking about going to the big city. It's going to be about, who do you see as the person who is, what face do you see as the person most affected by this, even though the dollars are going to be big?
Yeah, what tearjerker story really pulls your heartstrings? That's going to be the issue out there. And as you mentioned, Steve, the separation of powers issue. The judges are Chief Justice Kemp came out and said, he doesn't have any problem with any other part of the bill but this issue. And that is the issue that could also throw this back, just as the 2003 case threw it back. Get it into the courts again, and have a protracted situation where nothing. We have to come back and revisit this issue again at some time in the future.
Yeah. Well, let's clarify or amplify, if we can, what we mean with the other part of this amendment that's got the legal community up and parts of it anyway.
One thing to note is this is something that was not in the ballot measure that was going to be on the ballot in 2016. About
issue 4.
Issue 4 did not include this very crucial piece about taking judicial rulemaking authority away from the courts and transferring it to the legislature. I've talked to some supporters of the amendment that say, well, this is really just putting policymaking back into the hands of the legislature where it belongs. That's the policymaking branch. I think that the legislature already has a lot of power in Arkansas. Especially
got even more a couple of years ago.
And it's not just this amendment too. Interestingly, there's several proposed constitutional amendments that are about vesting even more power in the legislature. There's one, for example, that looks at education and says that the courts should not be involved in setting an oversight authority when it comes to education, which has been a feature of sort of Arkansas, the public school landscape for quite a while. So the courts obviously do not like this, that the legislature, rather than the judicial branch, would have power over their proceedings and their rules.
And this was not actually codified into law until Amendment 80 of 2000. Up until then, it didn't actually say that the Supreme Court made its own rules on pleadings and procedures. But that was the general practice, was that there was some kind of arrangement between, maybe as an informal gentleman's arrangement between the two branches. Supporters also say that Congress has some ability to have control over the Supreme Court's rules. but then not as many as this would do. So that's where the issue is how much authority. Under this, even Governor Hutchinson said yesterday, the way he reads it, that under this, if this passes, then the Supreme Court would have to technically come to the legislature to ask to make changes to the size of the paper that they use or the hours that they work. It could be that significant. On the other hand, it might just be, whether the legislature would actually get involved in that kind of thing, who knows? But those are the two arguments. How much control should the legislature have over the Supreme Court? Supporters say if you don't do this, then no matter what else we pass, then the Supreme Court will just use those rules to counteract whatever's in the amendment. That's their argument.
On to another issue, and that is internet sales taxes. No sooner had we concluded our broadcast this past week, look what we did to Amazon.
Yeah.
One edition of Arkansas Week, and the next thing you know, Amazon caves.
What influence?
Yeah, it happened last Friday, as you said. Amazon came, and this is was in response to a couple of bills, one House bill and one Senate bill, that were passed earlier in the week, and what happened was Amazon said, we're going to, beginning in March 1st, we're going to start charging sales tax on purchases by Arkansas consumers who purchase things online. I guess the big issue for this is how much, and you saw that a lot this week in some of the committee hearings, how much money is this going to bring to the table? I think the estimates have been anywhere from 30 million to 100 million. And now it's interesting. You're starting to see fights from lawmakers over how to spend money we don't even have yet.
Whether to earmark it, whether to divert it to dedicate it to it.
Yeah. So.
Right. So I mean, the interesting sort of episode that played out this week was in the House Rev and Tax Committee, where Democrats, with their enormously attenuated position in the legislature as a whole now, managed to still stack that committee with an unusual number of members. Sort of as an aside, at the expense of having more members on some of the other committees. They really put all their eggs in that basket. And they were attempting to use that leverage to extract some concessions when it comes to acting on some of the priorities that the Democratic minority is sort of marginalized on in the legislature now.
Yeah, and Senator Files, who has been kind of the chief architect of all the tax cut bills, financial policy bills in this session, has said that, he was kind of pretty upset that the Democrats, as Benji noted, had staged this kind of coup in the committee. He said he's going to bring the bill back up to see, and I guess he has to, but to figure out how what's going to happen in terms of going forward. I think there's going to be some negotiations and the Democrats may get a small victory. It may be the first of the session. Yeah.
I think they were pushing for things like, I know rural fire departments on the list, and an increase in pre-K spending, which is long been a priority. And I mean, what it really comes down to is the idea of if there's extra money coming into the state, should it be put towards spending for certain needs, or should it be allocated towards tax cuts?
Yeah, well, that's always a possibility, Steve. Additional tax legislation, reduction legislation.
Well, that could come up.
Whether it raises 30 million, 40 million, or 50, it's going to grow.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, Amazon is going to collect the tax, so I mean that is going to come in. And so, the argument is, a lot of Republican legislators have signed the no tax pledge, and so, they may be in the mood to try to cut taxes more. I think the idea from the governor and the leaders of the legislature was to get the tax cuts done first, and get that done early, and then worry about the spending afterwards. Well, we're past early. The session is halfway done. So whether or not there's going to be, a mood for more tax cuts, it's hard to say. The revenues have still been not what we would hope for so far this fiscal year. Oddly enough, the sales tax is one reason why. And there's been people are buying more stuff online than they were. So and when that happens, they don't pay sales tax even though they're supposed to, and none of us do. So
Speak for yourself.
But you write a check. Show me the check. Show me the check you wrote.
I guess I just admitted to a felony on TV.
yeah.
But you know, it's just there's no mechanism to do it.
Yeah.
You know, I don't even know how much I spent last year online. But you know, now that's the move is to try to get that, make sure that those tax dollars come in. But if they come in, then what do you do with? That means that there's a tax increase technically on people, and they don't want to pay more taxes.
Yeah, and one of the things that everybody's been saying during the session is wait until this blue ribbon panel comes in place, and then we can figure out what to do with with tax policy in Arkansas. And now this so-called stream of money comes in, and everybody kind of says, oh, wait a minute, you know.
It's less abstract now.
Yeah,
also.
yeah, and you know, there's the as you mentioned, the Republicans with the no tax cut pledge, but also they've promised we're going to give a tax cut to the higher earners, and that's hanging out there. So I think everybody's kind of chomping at the bits when this money comes in, how much, and what to do with it. And plus the blue ribbon panel comes in, then I think there's going to be a real change in tax policy in Arkansas.
Well, and casting a shadow over everything that the state does, the General Assembly does in terms of fiscal policy, tax policy, is what is Washington going to do with health care policy. Mm-hmm. Now, that won't affect this biennium or this fiscal year, or likely possibly even the next, but it's there and it's got to be resolved.
Yeah, that, the health care policy, but also the federal government's looking at tax cuts too. So.
Yeah.
And that's all going to figure in the mix to what Arkansas does, but right now it's pretty unclear as to what direction, even from the governor, as Steve had pointed out, has said that, you know, he wants to kind of look at the blue ribbon panel, and he's already got 2 tax cuts in already, so I think we may see a little bit combination of both tax cuts and addressing those needs.
Who should be entitled to use which public restroom? I mean, it was. We knew it was coming, and apparently there was a shell. I think it's still a shell. I don't think the sponsors have yet fleshed it out.
Well, there's a shell bill out there that would, and all it says is that it includes the words concerning the use of transgender persons in restrooms. It says almost nothing more. And all we know, and it's got 2 sponsors as far as, I mean, that's all it's got so far. The governor is against it completely, and says that we don't need it, says that with the new administration and recent court actions that there's not a problem in Arkansas. Last year when the Obama administration sent a directive saying that schools should basically let transgender children use the bathroom of their choice. The governor responded, against that, said that that was meddling, that school districts can handle this on their own. Right now, there doesn't seem to be a huge problem with it, he says. So we have this bill out there. It's a shell bill. It doesn't have a long line of sponsors behind it. You have the governor against it. You have a new administration in Washington that's not putting pressure on the state to do this. You have North Carolina. They keep reconsidering their own bill. So, we'll see where this one goes. The session is now halfway over, and every day that passes means that bills are less likely to get through. So this one you hate to make predictions, but it's not like we're on the verge of this getting passed.
Yeah, and it one being a shell bill wasn't put on. It's still not on the calendar yet. The business community, specifically the tourism industry in the state, tourism director Kane Webb, I think the Little Rock Convention Bureau, and the Arkansas Hospitality Association all came out and said we don't need this. This is not necessary. So. I think it is, as Steve said, it's going to take a lot to get this bill first even on the agenda, and then once out of committee, it's going to be difficult.
Last session, we had similar legislation, and the State Chamber of Commerce came out firing both barrels. Don't do this. Mm-hmm. And the Hutchinson administration, Governor Hutchinson, was able to negotiate a more acceptable version of the legislation and kind of cool things down a little bit. Are we likely to see that again? I am told he's openly he's contemplating a veto. It could be an easy vote for a lot of members.
I think it's been a little surprising just how strongly the governor has made his opinions known on this. Right. I mean, he played it much more cautiously with HB 1228 back in 2015, which was the so-called RFRA bill that you're referring to, Steve. With this one, he's getting out in front of it and saying, don't do this. And I think also, the protests in 2015 over that bill were huge. There was a lot of public outcry about it. It made the national news. It was a little bit overshadowed by a bill in Indiana that then Governor Mike Pence signed into law, and that happened to come a little bit before Arkansas's bill. So I mean, the governor was definitely
North Carolina.
Right. So, and I think that progressives right now in Arkansas, liberals they're angry. They're motivated. I was up at the Capitol a couple weeks ago when the sanctuary campus bill that targets undocumented students and college campuses in Arkansas came up. There were tons of people out there for that. You think about the turnout for the Women's March in January, and I think that although progressive forces in general may not be exactly ascendant in Arkansas politics, that's still just a fight that the governor very clearly does not want, and a lot of Republicans in the legislature, I think, also do not want. And I think the interesting thing will be how will some of these more conservative legislators who sort of speak for that wing of the party, such as Representative Bob Ballinger, Senator Bart Hester, will they really embrace this thing, or will they also sort of step back and not be interested?
Yeah, and I guess we got until March 6th until the bill filing period is over with, and I think that is a period you have to watch to see if any of these kind of social issues, these issues that are really get people up in arms on both sides are going to come up, and the governor has taken a policy, and I think he's been more forceful in this session than he was last session to come out and say we don't need this, or he at the beginning of the session, just when he talked with reporters, he said we really want to stay on policy issues and not get caught aside on a lot of these social issues that and unfunded mandates. So, and I think that's really been pretty strong.
Well, he is at odds on yet another piece of legislation involving the hard right side of his party, and that's pistols on campus.
Well, right now, President Charlie Collins has been pushing a bill that would require school districts to, not school districts, colleges and universities to allow their concealed carry permit holders to who are faculty and staff to carry their weapons on campus. And that bill has gone through every stage of the process, House committee, House, Senate committee, and it's gone through just fine. Under the law now, schools, colleges, and universities can allow it, but they can also opt out, and they have all opted out. And then yesterday in the Senate, Senator Jeremy Hutchinson added an amendment that passed quite easily that requires training that for them to be able to carry their weapon on campus. They also have to go through at least 16 hours of training by the state police on active shooter drills. And so for Representative Collins, that is a no-no. You can't, that is too much of a restriction. So the bill now goes back to the Senate Judiciary Committee, and it will go, from there, the amendment can be stricken and sent back to the Senate, or more amendments can be added. This one is really totally up in the air. The governor has questions about it, even though he was a supporter of a movement a couple of years ago by the NRA to allow public school districts to arm their staff members and train them if they choose, K through 12. And we have several schools where the staff is trained and they are ready to shoot people if they have to. But he does want, he is concerned about there being a lack of coordination on this. All the colleges and universities are against it, at least publicly. So right now, this is a very interesting bill, and we don't know where it's going to go at this point.
Yeah, we were both there watching the debate. It was passionate on the Senate floor when that's Representative Collins has called this move by Hutchinson hostile amendment that and I think they're back and forth on that, and I think he believes it was intended to kill. It's kind of restarted the process, and I still think it's going to be over the next week. That's going to at the Capitol. It's going to be a pretty hot issue up there.
And I believe he and the Senate sponsor have suggested, well, in that case, we're going to amend it to allow students to carry as well, correct?
Yes.
Well, I mean, with how would one argue against it? I mean, with training, if you're going to allow staff and faculty to pack with training, why discriminate against the students?
Well, I think
what would be the argument?
everybody's
What
going
would
to
be
be
the argument against it?
Well, Collins, I mean, he presented an idea before the vote to university leaders and said, okay, how about this? We will do training, but we have to include students. And they said, no, we don't like that idea either. So it got stuck. And so, I mean, the idea of students being able to have concealed weapons on campus is a little hard for university officials to accept, but they don't want anybody to be able to carry. They believe that their own law enforcement agencies are the best ones equipped to respond to a situation, and they think that they can do it quick enough. The supporters of the bill say, 1 or 2 minutes is still a long time when someone's got a semi-automatic weapon.
Speaking of time,
meanwhile, you still can't bring guns to the state capitol.
Speaking of time, we're out of it, at least for this edition. Thanks very much for joining us. See you next week.
Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.